Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Call That Haunts Maine. It's kind of a running joke at the office that I always seem to get the strangest carringer. Some co-workers say I'm cursed. Others just say I'm lucky because it keeps the shift interesting. Honestly though, I never gave it much thought, until that one call that still lingers in my memory like smoke. Most of the calls I've taken as a 911 dispatcher were odd but harmless. A drunk man trying to report his own party, neighbors arguing over lawn decorations, cats stuck in crawl spaces. They might be bizarre, but they're rarely disturbing. That was true until one slow afternoon turned into something that still sends chills through my bones. I'd taken over a friend's evening shift, half drowsy and watching the clock, expecting the same routine, an uneventful countdown to the end of my workday. That was before the call that would change the way I sleep at night. I heard the soft chime of an incoming call and slid my headset on with the usual practiced efficiency. 911. What's your emergency? I asked, expecting maybe a noise complaint or another accidental butt dial. Instead, a small, trembling voice responded, I think there's someone in my house. My heart sank instantly. It was the voice of a child, soft, hesitant, and on the verge of tears. Calls from children always hit differently. They carried a kind of raw fear that wrapped around your chest and didn't let go. I softened my tone and tried to keep calm. What's your name, sweetheart? I asked gently. Elizabeth, she whispered. The name felt delicate in my ear, like the trembling voice that carried it. That's a beautiful name, Elizabeth. My name is Amelia. I'm here to help you, okay? Can you tell me what's happening right now? I kept my voice light, even as my insides twisted with growing concern. There was a moment of hesitation on the line, and I could hear her breathing, shaky and fragile. Then she spoke again. I think someone's in my house, she repeated. My parents, they're not home. I clenched my jaw. Anger flickered inside me. Who leaves a child home alone at night? I pushed it aside for the moment. Is there anyone else there with you, sweetheart? I asked. Yeah, I think they're looking for me. And just like that, her voice trailed off, swallowed by a sudden stillness. A tension filled the air between us. If it weren't for the soft, terrified breaths I could hear, I might thought the line had gone dead. Then she whispered. They said my name. I froze. Her voice cracked. She was definitely crying now, barely holding it together. Elizabeth, listen to me, I said, keeping my tone steady. Can you tell me where you are right now in the house? There was a pause, and then she said, I'm in my parents' closet. I heard the door close. I think they're downstairs. The fear in her voice was palpable. I pictured a tiny girl curled up in the dark, alone in a silent house that didn't feel safe anymore. I asked for her address, and she gave it. To my relief, the house wasn't far from the nearest police station. Elizabeth, I want you to stay very quiet and listen to my voice. I've sent officers to your home. They'll be there in about 5 minutes. You're doing such a great job. Just stay hidden and keep listening to me. She didn't respond at first. My heart pounded in my chest. Elizabeth, are you still there? I asked again. Finally, her voice came through. Listen, she said softly. I heard Pern move, her hand pulling it away from her face. I strained my ears and heard it, whispering. Unclear but present. Not one voice but several. It sent a ripple of dread through me. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like at least 3 different people speaking low. Frantic things. I held my breath, hoping the officers were close. Elizabeth, stay quiet. Okay. Don't let them hear you. But then she whispered, he's coming up here. Please help. I felt powerless. It's one of the worst feelings you can experience as a dispatcher, to hear someone in danger and know there's nothing you can physically do. You're going to be okay, I told her, trying to sound confident. Just hold on. They're almost there. The whispering got louder through the phone. urgent and overlapping. I could now clearly distinguish at least 3 separate voices. Then, the creak of a door. My stomach dropped. Elizabeth screamed. I jolted in my seat. Elizabeth, are you okay? What's happening? I tried not to let my voice betray my fear. She whimpered. There's a man, he has really long legs. And a big smile. I didn't know what to make of it. A moment later I heard it. A bang in the background, then the shout of a man. Police. Relief washed over me. But it didn't last. Elizabeth was still crying, and the whispering hadn't stopped. If anything, it was worse. It didn't make sense. If it was one intruder, why were there so many voices? And then she said the last thing I ever heard from her. He isn't touching the floor, and the line went dead. I tried to call back. Again and again. Nothing. Silence, over and over, until it rang into the void. I later learned that when the officers arrived, they found the phone in the closet. That was all. No sign of Elizabeth. No sign of anyone. I never heard what happened to her after that. It's been years now. There were rumors, whispers and speculation among dispatchers and officers alike, but no one ever confirmed anything. Some think it was a kidnapping. Others, well, let's just say people started inventing things to fill the silence. But to this day, that call haunts me. I still think about her, Elizabeth, the girl with the frightened voice and the big heart, who stayed brave for as long as she could. I think about her name being whispered in the dark by unseen voices. I think about the tall man with the smile, and I think about how I'd give anything to have heard her voice one last time. In this job, you hear everything. You hear people scream, cry, beg, and whisper, but there are some voices that stay with you forever. Has stayed with me. I've taken thousands of calls in my career, but I only remember a handful. Elizabeth's is the one I can still hear in my dreams. There are nights I sit by my window, staring out into the dark, wondering if she's out there somewhere, wondering what she saw, wondering what saw her. Because even now, I can still hear those whispers if I try hard enough, and I still don't know if it was just one man, or something else entirely. Story 2. The Girl in the Window. There's a local archive in my town that logs old 911 calls. It's not something most people know about, but I stumbled upon it during a slow night shift a few years back. I was doing paperwork and trying to fight the usual late-night fatigue when I found it. A dusty digital library of emergency calls stretching back decades. Most of them were typical: noise complaints, reckless driving, public disturbances, but one in particular, dated 2017, stuck with me. It was different, chilling. The kind of call you listen to once and wish you hadn't. The voice of the girl on the line, the confusion, the fear. It didn't just unsettle me, it stayed with me. I've replayed it countless times in my head, wondering what really happened that night in Cedar Rapids. This is the story behind that call. I'm not adding anything. This is exactly how it was logged and recorded. The transcript begins at 8:43 p.m. when a 911 operator picks up a call from a residence listed under a 17-year-old girl named Mary. Her voice trembled with panic. "Hello, I see something. Someone outside," she said. When asked to describe what she was seeing, her voice faltered. "He's just standing there. He's been out there a long time." She went on to describe a figure, male, silent, unmoving. She said he looked almost like a mannequin, naked. Still, it was dark out, and the lighting made it hard for her to see him clearly. But what stood out was the way he didn't move. "He's just watching," she whispered. She explained that her mother was working late and wouldn't be home until after 11. She was alone, scared, vulnerable. The dispatcher immediately assured her that police had been dispatched. 2 units, in fact. But Mary's fear only grew. "Is he doing anything?" the operator asked. "No," Mary said, her voice shaking. "He's just standing there." It had already been 5 minutes, and the figure had not moved. She said all the doors were locked, and she'd double-checked them. She was in her room now, door shut, nightstand pushed against it for extra security. "If you have a closet," the dispatcher advised, "you should go into it until the police arrive." Mary said she would. Then she paused. "I can't see his face," she said. It's all fuzzy, like the rest of him. His body's blurry too. The dispatcher reassured her again. But then came a moment of chilling silence. I'm going to die, Mary said suddenly. I just know it. The dispatcher tried to keep her calm, to reassure her, but Mary wasn't listening anymore. Wait, he's gone. He's not there anymore, she said softly, but her relief didn't last. Moments later, the power in her house went out. Everything went dark. I don't see any police lights, she said. I don't see anything at all. The dispatcher asked if there might be a power outage in the neighborhood and told her to find a flashlight. Mary said she had one and started looking for it. But then came a strange sound, something so loud that Mary couldn't hear the operator anymore. It's like locusts, she cried. It's so loud, it's coming from outside. What's going on? The dispatcher didn't hear anything on her end, but Mary was panicking. She screamed into the phone that the buzzing was getting louder and louder, that it was surrounding the house. There are more of them, she said suddenly. There are more of them outside now, I think. I think there are 20 of them. Her voice cracked under the pressure. The dispatcher, now clearly alarmed, asked if she saw any of the officers who had been dispatched. Mary said no. I just see them, she said. They're just staring at my house, not moving, not blinking, just watching. The call went silent. Then came one final whisper, please help me. The line went dead. Police arrived at 8:56 p.m., less than 15 minutes after the call began, but the scene they found raised more questions than it answered. The front door was locked. The lights in the house were off. No one answered. When they forced entry, they found the house empty. Mary's bedroom was undisturbed. Her phone was found on the floor near the window, but Mary was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry, just the echoes of that chilling call and the lingering fear it left behind. What makes this story worse is what happened after. The operator who took the call said she couldn't hear the buzzing sound that Mary described, yet it continued on the recording for 13 minutes after the call had supposedly ended. Static, humming, whispering beneath it all, like voices from another place. The responders reported nothing unusual in the neighborhood. No figures, no group of silent people, nothing. They canvassed the area, reviewed security footage, asked neighbor. No one saw anyone unusual that night. No one heard the buzzing. And Mary? She was never found. Her mother was questioned. Her friends were questioned. No one had any idea what happened to her. It was as if she vanished from the world in the span of a few panicked breaths. The only evidence she had ever existed was the recording, and even that didn't feel real anymore. Over the years, people have speculated about what really happened. Some say it was a break-in gone wrong, and she was taken before the police arrived. Others say it was a mental breakdown, that she hallucinated the entire thing. But the call, that call, it doesn't sound like someone hallucinating. It sounds like someone watching something real, something she couldn't understand, something she shouldn't have seen. The way she described the man outside, the way he didn't move, the blurriness of his features, the sudden blackout, the chorus of voices, the droning hum, the fact that multiple identical figures appeared. It felt orchestrated, like something out of a dream twisted into nightmare, like a glitch in reality, or a door opening to something we're not supposed to know exists. To this day, I can't stop thinking about her voice, the way she begged for help, the way she said they're watching me. The recording is still in the archive. Technically, anyone can request to hear it, but I don't recommend it. It doesn't feel like a normal emergency call. It feels like something else entirely, something that was never supposed to be heard. Some say Mary simply ran away. Others think it was a hoax, but the fear in her voice wasn't acting. It was real, visceral, raw, and the buzzing on the line, that wasn't part of any system glitch. It had texture to it, like 1,000 wings moving in unison, like something living just beyond the veil of what we call normal. And she heard it before any of us did. Some nights, when I'm walking to my car after a long shift, I look out into the dark just like she did. I look between trees and rooftops, wondering if something is out there, watching. I wonder what Mary saw when she looked out that window. I wonder why she said his body was blurry, why she thought she was going to die, and why, After all these years, not a single trace of her was ever found. It's like she was pulled into something the rest of us can't see, something quiet, patient, and ancient. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because it haunts me. And maybe if I say it enough, it'll start to feel less real. But deep down, I know it's not going away. And I know, somewhere, someone still remembers her last words. They're watching. Story 3. The Burned Silence. Before I became an EMT, I worked as a team leader for a Lifeline service in the UK. Our devices were meant for elderly or disabled individuals, worn like pendants or bracelets, connected to alarms for emergencies. Often they linked to smoke detectors or door sensors. Most calls were manageable. False alarms, forgotten medication, or falls. But there was one call that shattered the boundary between routine and tragedy. It was the middle of a night shift, the kind where the silence wraps around you and every sudden sound feels like an intrusion. I remember hearing the shrill beep of a smoke detector. That sound, sharp and repetitive, rang through my headset. But something else bled into the background, something softer, fragile, broken. A man's voice, faint and panicked, barely above a whisper. "Help, water, please." It was distorted by the fire alarm's insistence, but it was there. I quickly dispatched the fire service to the location, only about 5 minutes from our call center. But I didn't end the call. I kept the line open, listening. There was little else I could do but wait and pray it held on long enough. The beeping of the alarm was joined by something deeper, low, crackling sounds, and then the roar of flames growing stronger. The fire was getting worse. I could hear the intensity building, a terrible crescendo of heat swallowing wood and glass. Then came a wet, bubbling sound. It was faint, almost beneath notice, but unmistakable once you focused on it. Gurgling, choking, a voice fading into something that didn't sound human anymore. I spoke into the call, repeating instructions to get outside, pleading for him to move, to crawl, to try anything. But there was no response, just the worsening fire, and that haunting sound, like someone breathing underwater, drowning in smoke and heat. Minutes passed. The sounds grew sharper, harsher, until they were replaced by the muffled clicks and crackles of radios. The fire service had arrived. The relief I felt was fleeting. I stayed at the call center, unwilling to let go of the line, even though I knew my role was done. I wanted to believe the firefighters had rescued him in time. I wanted to believe the sound I heard was just the fire playing tricks with acoustics. Denial is powerful. I left the call center under the care of my colleagues and drove to the location myself. I needed to see it for myself. When I arrived, the house was still smoldering. A firefighter met me and explained they hadn't found anyone yet. My heart sank. Hope faltered. I had heard him. I knew he was inside. He had been right there, speaking, pleading. An hour later, the fire crew confirmed what I feared. They found a body near the back door, just beside a wheelchair. He hadn't made it. Worse yet, they said the door had been locked from the inside. He had been trying to get out. His escape was so close, only feet away. But the flames had moved faster. I was called later to a coroner's court to explain the nature of the call and my involvement. That's when I learned more about him. He was a smoker, often used matches, and had a rare skin condition that required the application of a paraffin-based cream. That night, it was believed he lit a match to light a cigarette, dropped it under his knees, and the cream ignited. It was an accident, one with tragic, irreversible consequences. But the sounds I heard stayed with me. They haunted me. Even now, years later, I can recall them clearly. That faint gurgle, that final plea for help, the bubbling rasp of someone trying to speak through a body breaking down. It was my job to remain emotionally detached, to be calm and professional, but that night cracked something in me. I had never heard death unfold in real time before. It's different when you witness it remotely, when all you have are sounds and words, no visuals, no presence. It becomes something else. It burrows under your skin. You begin to imagine what they were feeling, what they were seeing, how helpless they felt. I've seen some horrendous things as an EMT since then, things I wouldn't wish on anyone, but nothing has left a scar quite like that phone call, because it wasn't just the fire, it was the silence after. The worst part is the guilt. Rationally, I know there was nothing more I could have done. I wasn't trained to fight fires or carry people out of burning homes. But emotionally, that helplessness burns more than flames ever could. I had his voice in my ear, and all I could do was listen to it fade. That experience hardened me. It taught me the painful lesson every responder eventually learns. You can't save everyone. Sometimes all you can do is be a witness to someone's final moment. And sometimes, even being a witness feels like a betrayal. I've carried that with me into every ambulance shift since. When I walk into scenes now, when I treat patients who are bleeding or panicking or clinging to consciousness, I always remember that man. I remember that voice asking for water. I remember the smoke swallowing it whole. I've told this story only a few times, mostly in hushed conversations with fellow EMTs during graveyard shifts. We all have one story like this. One that doesn't leave. One that changes you. Mine just came earlier than I expected. I can still picture the house. The cracked frame of the back door. The melted wheels of the chair he never made it back into. I still hear the faint crackling of the fire and the echo of radios. I still wonder what he was thinking in those final moments. Was he calling for help because he knew someone was listening? Did he know I was there on the other side of the call? Did he hope I could somehow save him? Or was it just instinct? His last breath used to call into the void, desperate to survive. After that night, I took a short leave. I told the team I needed time to regroup, and thankfully they understood. It wasn't burnout exactly, it was something quieter, something more haunting. I started walking more. I'd take long walks at night through empty streets, listening to the quiet. I think I was trying to remember what silence sounded like before that call. It never came back. The silence is different now. It has a shadow in it, an echo of something that once was. I wish I could tell you that the image has faded with time, that the gurgling sounds have dulled, that the guilt has lightened. But they haven't. They just live deeper in me now, quieter, but no less present. There's something about being on the other end of a call during someone's final moments that shifts your perspective. You stop assuming there's always going to be a tomorrow. You start appreciating the small things. Fresh air, a warm bed, a voice that isn't panicked. That man never got to see morning. He never got to breathe fresh air again. His life ended in fire and smoke, while I sat helplessly listening. But in a way, maybe my presence gave him something, someone to hear him. Maybe knowing he wasn't alone in those last minutes meant something. That's the thought I try to hold on to, even when the memories get heavy. I'll never forget him. I won't forget that sound. And I won't forget the lesson he gave me. Never take silence for granted, because sometimes silence is the only thing left after the fire. Story 4. The voice on the line. I've been a 911 dispatcher for over 30 years, and in that time I've taken thousands of calls. Most blur together with age, routine emergencies, domestic disputes, fender benders, and the occasional bizarre situation that gives us something to laugh about at the end of a long shift. But every once in a while, there's a call that doesn't fade. I had one such call early one morning around 5:30 am. A woman called saying she thought she was having a heart attack. It was a quiet shift, and I remember her voice clearly calm, composed, maybe a little tired. We went through the usual protocol: name, location, symptoms, previous history. Nothing about it felt particularly alarming. I've spoken to people mid-heart attack, breathless and panicked, their terror coming through every word, but this woman sounded steady, a little too steady. After dispatching the ambulance, I asked if she wanted me to stay on the line until help arrived. Many callers take comfort in hearing a voice, someone walking them through the minutes as help races toward them, but she declined. "I need to get dressed," she said. The chest pain woke me, and I'm still in my nightclothes. I nodded silently and told her the ambulance would arrive soon. From the time I took the call until they reached her house was 17 minutes, well within our average response time. But when they got there, things didn't add up. The MS team arrived and almost immediately called for a deputy. The message they relayed back was simple and chilling. "Patient is deceased." I was stunned. I had just spoken to her. There had been no indication she was in immediate danger, no signs of struggling breath or deteriorating condition. She had been speaking clearly and even politely declined continued assistance. How could she be gone? I spoke with the deputy afterward. I needed to understand. He told me she had been dead for several hours, at least. That made no sense. We went over the timeline. The EMS team was confident. Rigor mortis had already begun. Her body was cool. There was no chance she had just died in those 17 minutes between our conversation and their arrival. She had been gone long before I ever picked up the call. And yet, I had spoken to her. She had answered my questions, responded in real time. There had been no delay, no confusion, no sign of distress. It didn't feel like someone trying to impersonate her. It felt like her. That's when the questions started swirling in my mind. Did someone else call using her name? Could a family member or friend have found her and called for help while pretending to be her? But when officers searched the house, there was no one else there. The door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No notes or calls from neighbors. And her phone, the one I had spoken to her on, was lying next to her bed, untouched since the call. That's when a different, more unsettling thought crept in. What if no one else had called at all? What if the voice I heard really was hers? I've had a few strange experiences in my career, but none like this. This wasn't just a bad connection or a delayed transmission. This wasn't a prank or a miscommunication. It felt real. It felt deliberate. And more than that, it felt like a goodbye. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't begged or panicked. She just wanted someone to know. Maybe she wanted to be found before the world moved on without her. Maybe her spirit held on long enough to make sure someone would come. It's not something I can explain, only something I remember. This wasn't the only time something like this happened, though it was the most vivid. Over the years, I've heard similar stories from colleagues, calls that came from numbers registered to the deceased. Most of us don't talk about it openly. It sounds too much like fiction, too much like the plot of a late-night thriller or an urban legend shared around the coffee pot. But I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The quiet hum of the dispatch room, the way her voice echoed slightly in my headset, the way she calmly told me she needed to change clothes. It wasn't the kind of thing you forget. And no matter how many rational explanations we tried to find, none of them fit. It was like trying to fit a puzzle piece into a space that didn't exist. I wonder sometimes if people really know what we hear on these lines. But there are stories behind every ring. Lives hanging in the balance. Words filled with fear, hope, confusion, and sometimes resignation. And then there are the voices that aren't supposed to be there anymore. The voices that whisper one last time before fading away. That woman didn't sound afraid. She sounded at peace. That's what unnerved me the most. If it had been a cry for help, I might have rationalized it as a mistake, a hallucination, a miscommunication. But it wasn't that. It was like a farewell, a soft acknowledgement of the end. And when you've worked in this job long enough, you start to understand how rare that is. Most people don't get to say goodbye. After that call, I started leaving a small notepad beside my station. I began writing down the odd ones, the voices, the silences, the calls that didn't quite make sense. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped it would help me process things. Or maybe deep down I wanted someone else to see the pattern. That pad is full now, tucked in a drawer I rarely open. But I know it's there. A quiet ledger of encounters with something we don't fully understand. I don't claim to know what happens when we die. That's above my pay grade. But I do know this. Sometimes the dead speak. Sometimes they reach back through static and silence, just to make sure they're not forgotten. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone like me gets to answer. I didn't tell many people about that call. My supervisor filed it like any other, non-responsive on arrival, presumed natural death. But I know what I heard. And when I look back on my career, it's not the chaos or trauma that haunts me. It's the quiet, the stillness after someone's last breath, the voice that shouldn't be on the other end of the line. It makes you wonder how much we really understand about life and death. It makes you listen more carefully, even when the line seems empty, because every now and then it isn't. And when it's not, you never forget it. Story 5. The late night walk. Back in college, I lived in the capital of my state, attending the university named after it. It was a fairly large school with over 1,000 students living in a vast apartment complex spread across several blocks. I didn't have a car, so I relied mostly on the bus or my old, battered bike. The university campus was about 20 minutes away by bus, which ran consistently thanks to the high number of student commuters. I lived off campus with a roommate who wasn't exactly reliable, especially when it came to shared responsibilities like groceries. I tried letting him handle the shopping once, and he came back with over $100 worth of alcohol, and not much else. That was the last time I trusted him with money. Since then, I handled everything myself, often scheduling grocery trips after my late evening classes. This became a routine. I'd attend my final lecture on Wednesday nights, review the professor's notes with a few classmates, then catch a ride to the local 24-hour store to stock up. The walk home from the grocery store wasn't short, about 3 miles, but it was peaceful in a strange way. The route passed by closed car dealerships, quiet apartment complexes, and dimly lit bars that remained open into the early morning hours. My favorite part of the walk was my stop at one particular bar. It stood out not only because of its open courtyard and thick plastic curtains, but also because of the people. It was a gay biker bar, a small haven of warmth and acceptance when no one gave me a hard time. The staff didn't mind me stopping in, even though I didn't drink alcohol. I was underage after all, but they were fine serving me sodas and letting me cool off after a long walk. Most weeks I'd spend 20 or 30 minutes there, sipping root beer and chatting with the regulars. I enjoyed the company, the familiarity, the sense of community. Even when the night was thick with humidity and heat, it gave me a break from the chaos of school and life. On the night everything went wrong, the heat was stifling. The kind of night where the air feels like it's pressing in on you, damp and slow. I finished my drink, said goodnight to the bartender, and picked up my 4 bags of groceries to start the long walk home. I'd barely made it 50 feet when I noticed flashing lights behind me. A police cruiser pulled up alongside me, its headlights sweeping across the sidewalk. A uniformed officer, maybe mid-30s, stepped out and asked what was in the bags. I didn't think much of it at first. I told him I'd just finished shopping and offered him the receipt. He took it from me without a word, shone his flashlight on it, then stuffed it in his pocket. I asked if I could have it back, explaining that I needed it to settle costs with my roommate. He refused. "It's evidence," he said flatly, and then demanded to search my groceries. Confused but not wanting to cause trouble, I agreed. I set the bags down and stepped back. He began tearing through them, pulling out each item, rice, mac and cheese, canned vegetables, and setting them on the concrete. Then, inexplicably, he pulled a knife from his belt and began slicing open sealed boxes. He cut open the rice, stabbed the packaging, poured some of it onto the ground. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying not to raise my voice. "Searching for drugs," he replied, dead serious. I stood there stunned. This wasn't a search. This was destruction. He wasn't looking for anything. He was trying to intimidate me. My hand started to shake. I took out my phone and began taking pictures. He noticed. His face changed. He demanded I hand it over. I refused. "I'm documenting a crime," I told him calmly. "Destruction of personal property." That's when he lost it. He lunged at me, grabbed my shoulders, and slammed me face first into the hood of his car. My phone flew from my hands, clattering onto the asphalt and sliding into the street. As I struggled to breathe, he shouted that I was under arrest for drug trafficking. "I'm going to find it," he said, "wherever you've hidden it." Then he did something I'll never forget. He yanked my pants down, right there in the middle of the street, shouting more slurs, calling me names I won't repeat. I panicked. My elbow shot backward, connecting with his nose in a loud crunch. He screamed in pain. Blood gushed from his face. I pulled my pants up, turned around, and saw him reaching for his gun. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed his wrist, twisted it, and sent the weapon flying into the nearby river. His arm snapped. He howled, falling backward. I picked up my phone from the street, tapped 911, and spoke as calmly as I could. "I've just been assaulted by Officer Unit 238 at 1354 Birkin Street. He attempted to search me unlawfully, destroyed my property, and exposed me publicly. I disarmed him in self-defense. His gun is now in the river. I'm requesting backup." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then a voice measured. composed. "Understood, sir. We are dispatching a supervising officer to your location." I stood there, heart pounding, as the injured officer screamed into his radio for backup, trying to spin the situation. But I had something he didn't. I had friends. One of them, a former neighbor and now the district attorney, picked up her phone when I called her next. She knew me. She knew my family. She also knew how the system worked. "Luke," I said into it, "I'm with the officer now. I'm safe. But I need someone senior here immediately." The DA's voice rang out loud and clear. "I'm on my way. Tell no one to touch him. I want badge numbers. If anyone lays a hand on him, they'll be answering to me." The older officer visibly paled. He asked for my name. I gave it. And then within minutes, 2 more cruisers arrived. The injured officer was now being treated in an ambulance, moaning about his shoulder. Then came the chief of police. And behind him, stepping out of a car like she owned the street, was the DA. She looked over the scene. Boxes of rice torn open, groceries scattered, my scraped hands, and a crooked cop slumped against his cruiser, and her face turned to stone. She demanded the cruiser's dashcam footage. They pulled it, and sure enough, it showed everything. The officer staking out the bar, waiting for me, following me. The search, the assault, the pants, everything. And just like that, the narrative crumbled. He claimed I was carrying drugs, but the footage showed a terrified student with grocery bags and no warning. She turned to the officer and said words I'll never forget. "That's sexual assault. What you did was not a search. It was an attack, and he had every right to defend himself." The legal fallout was swift. The officer was arrested that night. Charges followed: assault, abuse of power, hate-motivated conduct. In court, he tried to claim it was part of a larger sting on suspected drug activity at the bar. But between the bar's staff testimony, my photos, the dashcam footage, and a video recorded by a bartender, his case fell apart. He was sentenced to 5 years. And then, a month later, the city passed a new anti-discrimination ordinance. Under it, he faced further civil penalties for targeting me based on perceived orientation. The case was reopened. And there in the courtroom once again stood the DA, my family friend, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. He settled. $50,000 and an official apology later, the matter was closed. I took the cash and used 25 of it to repurchase the groceries. Just for fun. I even got the same cashier and took a photo of her ringing everything up. I don't share this story often, but I think about it more than I let on. It taught me that there are still good people in the world. That justice, though slow, can arrive when it's needed, and that being prepared, aware and connected can sometimes save your life. I still walk the same streets sometimes, passing the bar where it all began. The people they remember. They still call me Rice Guy with a smile, and I smile too, because that night could have ended in a very different way, but it didn't. And the reason it didn't was because I stood up, fought back, and refused to be silent. Story 6, Shadows of the Asylum. There's a place in West Virginia that looms like a scar on the edge of history. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, once known as Western State Hospital. Originally built in 1864, it was designed as a Kirkbride building, sprawling, grand and meant to house hundreds of patients suffering from mental illness. But over the decades, it became overcrowded and infamous for the horrors within its walls. By the time it shut down in 1994, thousands had passed through it, some willingly, others not. I worked there for years, not as a patient, but as a tour guide and event manager for its ghost hunts. In 2007, the site was privately purchased and ghost hunters began flocking to it. What started as weekend thrill-seeking became something far more serious for me. By 2021, I was done. Burned out, spiritually exhausted, but some stories, they still haunt me. During my training, I was stationed on the first floor while another group toured to the upper levels. The hall was quiet, lit only by moonlight filtering through the high windows. It was peaceful, almost serene, until I saw it. The silhouette of a man, clearly defined from head to hip, passed by the windows. He moved from left to right, casting a long shadow against the opposite wall. "Did you see that?" I whispered to the others. As we all turned to look, an arm, just an arm, emerged from the right side of the window. It reached out like someone leaning casually into view. I ran to the window and looked out, expecting to find a trespasser or prankster, but the ground below was 7 feet down. There was no one there, no footprints in the dirt, just stillness. That was the moment I stopped doubting. One of the strangest nights involved a spirit box session. If you've never used one, it's a device that rapidly cycles through radio frequencies, supposedly allowing spirits to manipulate the sound to speak. We were in a room notorious for a 1987 murder. I had noise-cancelling headphones on and could only hear the box. Static. Nothing but static for over 10 minutes. I was starting to zone out when I suddenly heard a woman's voice, clear and deliberate. She said, "Evil." I repeated it aloud. Instantly, my co-worker flashed a light in my face, signaling that we had to leave. We rushed out, down the hall, and only once we were in the center of the building did she explain. While I sat there hearing only static, she had heard shuffling footsteps just beyond the door. She called out, asking if anyone was there. And right then, I had spoken the word evil. It rattled her. It rattled both of us. We ran other experiments in the wards. Once we closed all the doors to see what would happen. One heavy door, as I was shutting it, suddenly twisted in my grip and slammed itself shut. It felt as though someone yanked it from the other side with unseen hands. I tried to replicate it, opened and closed it a dozen times. Nothing. No draft. No imbalance. Just that one terrifying moment. Another time, a group of 3 guests brought a thermal imaging camera and set it to record the whole way. One of them walked to place a motion alarm at the far end. As he passed a doorway, we saw it on the tablet. A human-shaped figure, colder than the surroundings, peeked out, just a head and shoulders, leaning from the doorway as he walked by. We replayed it. It was real. It was not a heat signature glitch. It was a figure watching, then gone. June 3rd and 4th of 2017 marked the most profound experiences I've ever had in that building. That first night around 3:40 a.m., a group of us were sitting on the floor, listening. We had heard footsteps earlier, fast ones, running down the old hardwood. Then a female voice echoed faintly, followed by thuds and bangs from a distant room. I began to feel lightheaded, dizzy, uneasy. I thought I was just tired, but then a burning sensation started on my lower back, just right of my spine. At first I ignored it. I didn't want to be that guy in front of the guests, but the pain intensified until I finally asked my co-worker to look. She gasped. On my back was a mark, red and raised, like a burn or abrasion, about 4 inches long and 1 inch wide. It lasted for a week. A week. I'd seen guests get scratches before, marks that vanished in an hour, but mine lingered. And even now, that spot on my back still feels strange, numb sometimes, sore other times, as if something stayed with me. The very next night, we returned to the same hallway, same room. I had a voice recorder in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The recorder ran out of space, so I was checking the memory settings. That's when I felt it again, this time on my forearm, a sharp, burning sting. I lifted my light, and both I and the guest beside me watched as 3 raised welts appeared right before our eyes, slowly, deliberately, like something invisible dragged its fingers down my arm. They vanished after 15 minutes, but the experience left a scar on my mind. Not fear. Exactly, more like a cold awareness that we were not alone. Something had been trying to communicate, or maybe just remind us that it could reach us, touch us. Whatever its reason, it succeeded. I didn't sleep well for days after that. And then, of course, there was the woman. The figure who many believed haunted the upper halls. Pale, with long black hair and a hospital gown, she appeared to people in mirrors, hallways and locked bathrooms. I had seen her before, in dreams, never fully formed, but always the same. She would approach me in sleep, grab me and scream in my face. I used to think she was just a symbol of stress or exhaustion, Until one night I met a CNA who worked in the pediatric unit. We were talking about strange occurrences, and she casually described the same woman, down to the details, her skin, her bangs, the way she stared. When I shared my version, she went pale. That's when I knew she wasn't just in my head. Others had seen her. In one dream, she appeared beside my bed. As I looked down at myself sleeping, she stared, then shoved me violently. I woke up gasping. Eventually it became too much. Too many encounters. Too many sleepless nights. I resigned in 2021. I told people it was burnout, but the truth runs deeper. It felt like I had been in a long, draining relationship with something ancient and unkind. Every night spent in that building chipped away at my spirit. I loved the history, the stories, the people who came looking for connection, but I couldn't deny what I had seen, what I had felt. I had invited something into my life that I couldn't push back out, and the only way to recover was to leave it all behind. Since leaving, my mental health has improved dramatically. The heavy fog that seemed to follow me home each night is gone. The woman doesn't visit me in dreams as often, and when she does, she no longer screams. She just watches. Looking back, I wonder if places like that are meant to be left alone. They carry echoes not just of pain and trauma, but of the people who witnessed it. Their memories cling to the walls, to the air. And when we come in, we stir them up like dust in a forgotten room. I don't think everything I experienced was malevolent. Some of it felt more like sorrow made visible, but there were moments, undeniable moments, where the darkness felt personal, intelligent, watching. I still believe in the paranormal, but I no longer chase it. Some truths are best left untouched. Some doors, once opened, are impossible to close. Story 7. The fourth floor. I work night shifts at an old mental hospital built in the 1920s. It's the kind of place that feels older than time, where the walls seem to whisper if you stand too still. By now, I've grown used to the strange noises, the creaks of an aging structure, the shifting hum of distant machinery. But there's one part of the hospital I'll never be fully comfortable with. The fourth floor. It's the only floor not built directly into the hill, making it feel more exposed than the others. At night, when the wind hits just right, it feels like the whole building is breathing. The fourth floor, once used for electroshock therapy in isolation, is now empty. Patients haven't been housed there in years. Each unit is sealed with thick steel doors, and the hallway is long, unnervingly so. Even with the lights on, it always feels dim. And when third shift rolls around, it becomes a corridor of silence, one that waits. Last Wednesday night, I decided to walk that hallway alone. It wasn't part of my routine, but something pulled me there, like a quiet dare from the building itself. It was around 3 a.m., the hour when the world is still, and thoughts begin to stretch. I walked the full length of the hallway, letting the soles of my boots echo against the tile. As I neared the far window at the end, I noticed the glass was foggy and needed cleaning. I stepped closer, peering into the reflection. That's when I saw a handprint. It wasn't mine. It had been there all along, yet I hadn't noticed it from even 10 feet away. It was large, smeared slightly, as if pressed in a moment of desperation. My stomach dropped. I looked around quickly. There was no one else. No wind. No moisture. Just that single, unmistakable mark. Trying to calm myself, I turned back. But as I passed a side office, my flashlight caught nothing unusual. I kept walking, trying not to think too much. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast. Urgent. Like someone sprinting to catch up. I froze, heart pounding, and kept walking, my pace quickening. I refused to turn around. Everything inside me screamed not to. The footsteps matched my stride, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. As I neared the first unit door, I heard it. A loud, violent punch against the metal. Then another. And another. Each door I passed answered with a bang, like something inside was trying to get out. I sped up, nearly running now. But the hallway felt endless. My breath caught in my chest. I knew the floor was empty. I had verified it myself. But what I was hearing, it wasn't in my imagination. By the time I reached the stairwell, my hands were trembling. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was on the first floor. I tried to rationalize it. Old pipes, settling metal, maybe even echoes from another level, but none of it made sense. That pattern, that intensity, that presence, it wasn't done with me though. That night, when I finally drifted off to sleep, she appeared. The woman, pale, frail looking, in a thin hospital gown. Her skin was chalky white, and her long black hair hung over her face in damp strings. I'd seen her before in dreams, but now it felt different. Like she knew I had been there, like she was reaching for me. In the dream, she didn't speak. She just stared. Her face was blurry, like a reflection on water. Then she lunged. Her scream was like a chorus of pain and rage. I woke up gasping. At first, I brushed it off as just another nightmare. Working in a place like this, you're bound to have a few. But the next day, I was talking to one of the CNAs who worked in the pediatric wing. We were swapping stories, trading ghost tales like baseball cards, when she said something that made me stop cold. "Have you ever seen the pale woman?" she asked. My blood ran cold. I hadn't mentioned anything to her. I asked her what she meant. She described her in perfect detail. The hospital gown, the long black hair, the way she appears in mirrors and vanishes in doorways. Other staff had seen her too. Patients had mentioned her. Some even described being locked in bathrooms or waking up to find her standing silently in their rooms. She was known. She was feared. And she had followed me home. In another dream, she came again. This one was worse. I woke up inside the stairwell of my own home. Everything looked normal, but something felt wrong. I walked downstairs and entered my bedroom. My fiancée was sleeping peacefully on one side of the bed. But then I saw something that froze me. I was there too, lying in front of the closet, as if I'd collapsed mid-step. And standing beside my motionless body was her, the pale woman, her face tilted slightly, watching me. When I approached her, I tried to speak. "Who are you?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed me by the arms and screamed, loud, feral, a sound that didn't feel human. Then she shoved me. I fell backward and landed inside my own body, jolting awake in the real world at 3:15 a.m., drenched in sweat and paralyzed by dread. I've dreamed of her many times since, each one different, but always the same woman. Sometimes she's near, sometimes distant. Sometimes she just watches, silent and sorrowful. Other times she screams and grabs, as if trying to pull me somewhere I cannot follow. I've never seen her outside of dreams, not fully, but I feel her. In certain rooms, certain shifts, certain hours of the night, I feel the weight of her stare, and I'm not alone. Others in the hospital talk of similar dreams, similar sightings. It's like she exists in the walls, feeding off the memories of the place, a fragment of trauma made real. I don't know who she is. I don't know who she was, but I know she's still here. Some nights, I avoid the 4th floor altogether. I pretend I have paperwork. I find other tasks. I walk slower past that stairwell. But other times I return. I listen. I watch. I wait. Not because I want to see her again, but because I need to understand. She's more than a ghost. She's a question. A puzzle no one solved. And maybe deep down, part of me thinks if I can find out who she was, I can help her rest. Or maybe, just maybe, I'm part of her story now. A new chapter in a book that never ends. One more name whispered down the hallway. One more dream she slips into. Story 8. The Campground Watcher. A few years ago, I worked part-time as a seasonal ranger at a remote state park in the Pacific Northwest. The job was quiet, simple, and mostly uneventful. The park wasn't popular with tourists because it lacked big attractions. No towering waterfalls or majestic cliffs, just miles of forest, winding trails, and a small lake nestled deep in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of place people only visited to get away from everything, where cell phone signals vanished, and the nights were so quiet you could hear the trees breathe. I loved it for that reason. It gave me space. It gave me peace. But that year something changed. Something started watching from the woods, and it's a presence I still can't explain. My shift that night started like any other. I was stationed at the northern edge of the park, near Campground C. It was one of the smaller campgrounds, tucked between two ridge lines, only accessible by dirt trail. Most of the regular rangers didn't care for it because of how isolated it felt, but I liked that solitude. My main duty was to check in on campers, make sure their fires were out, and keep an eye out for wildlife. By 10:30 p.m., everyone was quiet, lights dimmed, fires reduced to glowing embers. I settled into my patrol truck at the edge of the access road, sipped lukewarm coffee, and prepared for a long night of stillness. That was when I saw it, the first sign that something was off. A figure, standing just inside the tree line, about 40 yards from the nearest camp. Too far for me to see details. Just a silhouette, still, watching. At first I assumed it was a camper stepping away to use the woods, but the figure didn't move, didn't sway, didn't adjust its posture. I flicked on my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trunks and underbrush, but the figure had vanished. No footsteps, no rustling, just gone. I radioed it into base, but no one responded. Standard issue radios often failed out there, especially in the ridge lines. I made a quick loop through the campground, checking every site. No one had left their tents or fires. Everyone was accounted for. I chalked it up to fatigue and tried to shake the nerves off, but something gnawed at me. I wasn't alone out there, and whatever I'd been watching hadn't finished. At around midnight, I decided to walk the perimeter trail. It circled the campground and led through a narrow ravine lined with fir trees. The moon was high, casting a faint silver light over the path. I walked slowly, listening, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Deep, ragged breaths, as if someone were trying to stay quiet while catching their breath. I froze. The sound came from the brush just ahead, barely concealed. I took a step closer and whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Another step. "Are you injured? Do you need help?" Still nothing. The breathing stopped. Then, snap. A twig broke, followed by the unmistakable sound of running feet dashing away into the forest. I gave chase for a few steps, flashlight swinging wildly, but the noise quickly faded. I stood there, alone, heart racing, surrounded by trees that suddenly felt much too tall, much too silent. Back at the campground, I checked the guest log. No reports of missing persons, no vehicles unaccounted for. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about the figure's silence, its stillness, wasn't human. Later that night, I returned to my truck, locked the doors, and sat with my hand on the ignition, debating whether to stay or report back to base. That's when I noticed something chilling. Muddy footprints leading around the back of my truck. They weren't mine. They weren't from boots or hiking shoes. They were barefoot, human, and small, like a child's. But there were no kids at Campground C. Not a single registered family. I stepped out slowly and followed the prints as they trailed off into the woods, vanishing after 20 feet. No other signs. No disturbances. Just those small, damp impressions in the dirt, as if someone had stood right behind me and watched. The following evening, I requested to be reassigned, but my supervisor brushed it off. Probably just a local messing around, he said. Or a lost hiker. But the look in his eyes said something else, like maybe he'd heard this before. Like maybe he knew more than he was letting on. I returned to Campground C anyway, this time determined not to stay the full shift. I planned to check the campsites early, leave a note for the morning crew, and drive back to the main lodge. But when I arrived, something was different. Every fire pit had been carefully rearranged. The stones were stacked into neat piles, not kicked over or scattered, arranged, precisely, almost ritualistically. One camper asked if we'd done it as a safety measure. I lied and said yes. Inside, I was deeply unsettled. On my last night there, something happened that still haunts my dreams. I was making one last sweep before driving out when I saw movement in the trees. This time I didn't run or call out. I stood still, watching. Slowly the figure emerged, a tall, thin man in what looked like hospital scrubs. His skin was greyish, almost ashen, and his face, it didn't look right. Not deformed, just vacant, like a mask. He stepped closer, until only the thinnest veil of shadow separated us. Then he stopped, We locked eyes, or at least I think we did. I could feel him looking at me, though his eyes seemed unfocused. I lifted my flashlight and he didn't flinch. He simply turned and walked. No, glided, back into the trees. I didn't follow. I just stood there, heart thudding, unable to move for nearly 5 minutes. When I finally got back to the truck, I found a note tucked under the wiper. A scrap of paper torn from a trail map. 3 words written in neat block letters. Don't come back. That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just a final warning. I handed in my resignation the next morning. No one questioned it. They didn't even ask me to train a replacement. That campground stayed closed the rest of the season for trail maintenance. But I know the truth. Whatever is out there isn't just a story for campfires. It watches. It waits. And sometimes it leaves footprints where you least expect them. I haven't been back since. But I dream of the woods. Often. Silent trees. The glint of moonlight on a still lake. And something pale moving just out of sight. If you ever find yourself in a remote park after dark and you feel like you're being watched, don't ignore it. Don't assume it's in your head. And if you find small barefoot prints circling your tent in the morning, pack up and leave. Don't ask questions. Don't wait for answers. Some places are forgotten for a reason, and some watchers never left. Story 9. The Light in the Field. Several years ago, I was visiting my grandparents who lived deep in rural Tennessee. Their home sat on a patch of land surrounded by dense woods and wide open fields that stretched toward the distant hills, the kind of place where the nights are pitch black, the stars crowd the sky, and every creak of an old wooden floorboard echoes like a whisper. I had always loved visiting them. Simple food, quiet mornings, and stories told by lantern light. But something happened during one of those summer nights that left a mark on me. It started with a light, small flickering, and impossible to explain. What followed was an encounter I still can't rationalize, no matter how many times I replay it in my mind. It was late July. The air was thick and warm, and the insects outside hummed like a steady pulse. I was staying in the old guest room, the one that faced the backfield where tall grass danced like waves in the dark. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but from a feeling. I sat up in bed and looked out the window. That's when I saw it. A single orb of white light, maybe the size of a basketball, hovering just above the grass at the far edge of the field. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't a lantern. It floated perfectly still, like a tiny moon suspended between earth and sky. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there, still glowing. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was a firefly caught in a strange trick of distance. But then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it glided along the edge of the tree line, almost as if it were pacing. I watched it drift, left to right, then stop. It stayed there for nearly 5 minutes before shooting upward at an impossible speed and vanishing into the night sky without a sound. My heart was pounding. I wanted to wake my grandparents, but something held me back. A strange shame, like I was witnessing something sacred or forbidden. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just lay there, staring into the dark, wondering if I'd imagined it, or if something had truly come to visit. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to my grandfather, expecting a laugh or a brush off, but he didn't laugh. He went very quiet. Then, in his low, gravelly voice, he told me, "You saw it too then." He went on to explain that ever since they'd moved into that house in the late 60s, they had seen strange lights in that same field, especially in July, sometimes white, sometimes blue. Always silent, always just hovering, never touching the ground. He said his father had seen them too, and so had a neighbor who moved away without saying why. "We never talk about it," he said. "People think you're crazy." I asked if he'd ever gone out to investigate. He looked at me and shook his head. "You don't go to it. You let it be." That should have been the end of it. A weird family story, passed down like folklore, but the following night the light returned. This time it was closer. I had left the window open slightly, and the room smelled like grass and dew. I woke up again around the same time, drawn to the window like a moth. The orb was back, but it was no longer at the far edge. It was hovering halfway through the field, brighter now, pulsing gently, like a slow heartbeat. I couldn't look away. It was beautiful and wrong all at once. As I stared, I noticed movement beneath it, shapes in the grass, dark forms, low to the ground. I couldn't see them clearly, but they moved in sync with the light, like shadows orbiting a planet. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt stretched, elastic. Eventually the light began to rise, slowly at first, and shot up and blinked out again. That night, I dreamed I was walking through the field barefoot. The grass reached my knees. In the dream, the light came down to meet me, hovering inches from my chest. It didn't speak, but I felt a message, something ancient, something that wasn't meant for words. When I woke, I was standing at the window again. I had no memory of getting up. My feet were dirty. The bottoms of my pajama pants were damp with dew. I was afraid to look outside, afraid of what I might find, but I had to. I scanned the field. No light, no movement, but right below my window in the earth was a small, perfect circle where the grass had been flattened. I didn't mention that to my grandparents. I didn't mention it to anyone. Some things feel too strange to share. On my last night there, I couldn't sleep. I paced the room, the hallway, even sat out on the porch for a while. The air felt heavier than usual, like the sky was waiting to break. Around 3 a.m., I stepped into the backyard and looked toward the field. Nothing, just darkness and silence. I felt both relieved and disappointed, but just as I turned to go back inside, a flicker caught my eye. It wasn't in the field, it was in the woods. A faint blue glow weaving between the trees. I watched as it moved deeper, vanishing behind the trunks. And then I heard something, a whisper, a single word. Come, soft, feminine, clear. It came from inside my own head, not my ears. I turned and ran back inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep at all. Since then, I've read about orbs. Some say they're spirits. Others say they're plasma balls, natural phenomena. And then there are those who think they're watchers from somewhere else, visiting briefly and vanishing before we can grasp their purpose. I don't know what I saw. I only know it was real. I felt it in my bones, in the air, in the way time bent around those moments. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had gone into the field, or followed the light into the woods, but I never will. Some invitations are not meant to be accepted. Some lights are not meant to be chased. Even now, years later, I'll occasionally dream of that light. It floats just out of reach, silent and pulsing, waiting for me to follow, and every time I stop, I watch, I remember. Because not all mysteries want to be solved, some just want to be witnessed. And in that field, under that sky, I became part of something older than my fear, something that watches, something that remembers me too. Story 10. The sound from apartment 3 billion. When I was in college, I lived off campus in a crumbling old apartment building that hadn't seen a renovation since the 1970s. The walls were thin, the plumbing moaned like a ghost with indigestion, and the radiators clanked to life every morning like they were protesting the sunrise. But the rent was cheap, and I didn't mind the quirks. My unit was on the second floor, and above me was apartment 3 billion. For the first few weeks of living there, I assumed it was empty. No lights on at night, no music, no footsteps, no signs of life. That changed on the 3rd week of September, when I heard the first sound, soft at first, like humming, or maybe someone whispering to themselves. It came through the vent in the ceiling of my bedroom, faint but rhythmic, repeating every night at the same time. At first I assumed a new tenant had moved in, maybe someone who worked nights and kept odd hours. I didn't think much of it until the sounds grew louder, evolving into what I can only describe as chanting, not in English, not in any language I recognized. The words rolled and hissed in long syllables, some sharp, some whispered, as though several voices were overlapping. It wasn't music. It wasn't talking. It was something else, ritualistic, persistent, and unsettling. I knocked on the ceiling with a broom handle one night, just to see if it would stop. It did. Instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. like something had paused, not because it was disturbed, but because it noticed me. The next morning I asked my landlord about the tenant in 3 billion. He looked puzzled and told me the unit had been empty for months. Still is, he said. No one's rented that place since March. I asked him to check anyway. He did, and later told me he'd gone up there, unlocked the door, and found it just as he left it, dusty, untouched, and unfurnished. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. That night the chanting returned louder than ever. I recorded it on my phone, but every playback was just static. No voice, no pattern, just a warbled hiss, like a broken radio cord between frequencies. I stopped sleeping in my room after that and moved my mattress into the living room, but the sound followed. Now it came from the vents, from the walls, from somewhere just behind the plaster, just beneath the surface. One night, I decided to record the sound using a different method. I left my laptop's voice recorder running all night while I slept with headphones in. When I reviewed the file the next day, it started normally. Silence, a few ambient clicks, and then something, a voice, clear, female, speaking directly into the mic as if kneeling beside the laptop. He watches you, she said. He waits in the quiet. Then nothing. I checked the timestamp. 3:33 a.m. I had no visitors that night. No windows were open. My door had been locked. I remember waking around that time, sweating, heart pounding, as if jolted from a nightmare I couldn't remember. That was the last time I recorded anything. I deleted the file. I didn't want it on my computer. I didn't want it near me. Soon other things started happening. My lights would flicker precisely at 3:33 a.m. every night without fail. One night they went out completely, and my phone started vibrating violently across the table, even though I had turned it off. When I turned it back on, there was a new voice memo saved to it, one I never recorded. It was a low growl, punctuated by harsh breathing. Just noise, but charged with something primal. I moved out a few days later, breaking my lease. I didn't care. I packed my things and left in the middle of the day without telling the landlord why. I didn't want to explain it, and I knew he wouldn't believe me if I did. After I left, I did a bit of research on the building. I found an old newspaper article from the 1980s about a man who had lived in apartment 3 billion. He was a reclusive linguist who claimed he was translating a forgotten language he believed had been whispered to him in dreams. He eventually stopped leaving the apartment, and neighbors complained of strange chanting and strange smells. When police finally entered his unit, they found the walls covered in writing, symbols that didn't match any known language. The man was gone. Never found. The room was empty except for a single cassette tape left spinning in a recorder. The tape contained only one thing: several minutes of a voice repeating a phrase over and over in a language that no expert could translate. I sometimes wonder if what I heard was an echo of that man, or maybe what he opened. Maybe he wasn't just translating a language. Maybe he was inviting it in. And maybe apartment 3 billion isn't haunted by a ghost in the traditional sense, but by a voice, an idea, an intelligence that hides in resonance, something that lives in vibrations, something that waits for quiet rooms and receptive ears. That building still stands. I've checked. Apartment 3 billion still isn't rented. No one stays there long. I haven't gone back. But sometimes, when I sleep in unfamiliar places, hotels, guest rooms, to a whisper I can't quite understand. And I don't try to, because I've learned something about those voices. They don't want attention. They don't need understanding. They just want to be heard. And once you've heard them, you become a speaker. A vessel, a carrier of tones that don't belong in this world. So now I sleep with a white noise machine by my bed, a loud, constant wave of static that fills the room. I don't allow silence anymore. Silence invites the voices back, and I fear that one day I won't be strong enough to ignore the whisper asking me to repeat the words.